Welcome the chosen ones. Do not confuse their apologies for enlightenment. Regret is sometimes simply another word for terror. Let it sink in. What if I told you that the folks who used to laugh their eyes at your anguish are now wide-eyed, sleepless, and privately whirling because you did not return? Here's the twist. According to psychologists, when a narcissist loses a key source of validation that they imagined would never disappear, their brain interprets it as the loss of control, ego, and the version of reality in which they still had access to your energy. They're not just sad. They are literally losing their heads. And guess what? The chosen one. They expected you to fold. They bet on your generosity, forgiveness, and previous practices of selflessness. But now you're a whole other frequency, and it's gently killing them. It's like seeing someone desperately attempt to hook into a power source that has been permanently removed while blaming the socket for changing their messages. Was left on read. The crocodile tears dried on your doormat, and they're now pacing about like they've misplaced their wallet, keys, and sanity. However, it is just you that they no longer have access to. And let's be honest, the only solution they were seeking for was a backdoor into your component. So now we're going to look at why your no is driving them insane spiritually, and why your development is sending shockwaves through their system, and why you walked away was not the end. It was the unmasking. Buckle up, because at the end of this, you will not just comprehend their passion. You'll thank yourself for not looking back. Let's go. Number 1. They never thought you could build an identity independent of their influence. They never thought you could build an identity independent of their influence. That is the truth. They never expected you to be alone in your thoughts. You were handy for them, not just because of what you provided, but also because of how simple it was to mold you via guilt, manipulation, and confusion. They had a false feeling of power since it seemed for a time that you required their permission to breathe. However, when you began to heal, when you finally saw through the layers of control and stopped dancing to their dysfunction, something inside them broke. They never planned for your progress. That was not in their plans. They assumed they'd always be able to push a few emotional buttons and draw you back in. They expected you to remain gentle, loyal, and lost in the character. They trapped you into that position and made them feel safe. It made them feel superior. They felt strong as long as you questioned yourself. But you're no longer playing the same game. You're not looking for their approval, affirmation, or even understanding. And here is when the infatuation starts. Not with your lover, but with their lack of control. They do not miss you. They miss the version of you that accepted being misunderstood, mistreated, and manipulated. They miss having someone to screw up and yet expect devotion from. They are no longer devastated when they see you unbothered, steady, and shining. They are upset. You were meant to remain the same. You were meant to need them. You were meant to return when they whistled. But you didn't. You outgrown their turmoil. And this makes them feel insignificant to someone like that. Your recovery poses a personal peril. They're not puzzled about what transpired. They don't understand how you achieved it without them. They don't understand how you got back up, regained your self-esteem, and went on without their apologies, affirmation, or aid. That is why they are unraveling. They assumed you were reliant on their script, not realizing you were busy drafting your own. And now that you've become who you really are, they're trapped on the sidelines, watching someone they can't identify, influence, or ever control again. Number 2, they expected time to heal their grasp on you, not you. They expected time to heal their grasp on you, not you. In their minds, all they had to do was remain silent long enough. And gradually, you would crawl back. They assumed your quiet indicated you were suffering without them, that you were only giving the issue some space before reverting to your previous habits. They banked on the emotional tether that was still around your neck. They didn't expect you to utilize that stillness to achieve exactly what they dreaded the most. Heal as they waited for the door to swing open again. You were creating a completely new one on the other side of the planet in tranquility. You utilized the anguish they created as fuel. You began asking yourselves actual questions. Why did I endure it? Why did I shrink? To make them feel comfortable? Why did I continue to give to someone who only took? And when you answered those questions, everything became obvious. You did not miss them. You missed your former self. They mistook your goodwill for weakness. They imagined that if they were gone long enough, your feelings would become desperate enough to welcome them back. But what really transpired was the polar opposite. You achieved emotional sobriety. You ceased romanticizing what they had contributed to the table. You recognized it for what it really was: emotional manipulation, dressed up as connection. You stopped blaming yourself for their actions. You realized they hadn't left a void in your life. They were entire. They're surprised since the door didn't simply remain shut. It disappeared. You no longer reply to breadcrumbs. You are not swayed by confusing messages or phony accountability. You're not perplexed by their unexpected return since you finally realized they're not sorry. They're merely startled that the enchantment has worn off. They can't accept that you didn't fall apart without them. It never was about love. It was always about control. They expected time to wear you down, but instead it set you free. Now they're trapped in the past, trying to figure out how the person they thought they broke is now too far ahead to look back. Number 3, your absence is more than simply a void. It's a mirror they can't avoid. Your absence is more than simply a void. They don't merely miss you in the same way that others miss someone who has moved away or stopped messaging. It goes far deeper than that. You walked away, creating a mirror, and now they are forced to confront the one thing they have always avoided: themselves. While you were around, they could project everything on you. You were their emotional dumping ground, their distraction, their justification for not expanding. As long as you were present, they could dodge responsibility. But now that you've left, there's no place to hide. They used to blame you for everything. You were overly sensitive, excessively silent, and overly emotional. Now that you're gone, that story is unraveling. The noise ceased, but serenity did not arrive. Instead, they're trapped with their own echo, which is deafening. You were the one who accepted their dysfunction without fighting dirty. You extended grace when it was not warranted. You've forgiven something that should have broken you. But now that you aren't there to absorb their filth, it's all coming back up to them, raw, unfiltered, and uncontrollable. They don't just miss your presence. They miss how you made them feel about themselves. You lessened the impact of their shortcomings. You made them feel human, even while they behaved inhumanly. You offered them a form of love. They did not turn. Now that it's gone, folks can see who they really are without your protection. It is not flattering. It is not easy. And it is eating them alive. They're trapped, reliving discussions in their heads and attempting to rewrite history so they can feel better about it. But nothing works. The version of you who would accept guilt or strive to make things right is no longer accessible. All that remains is an echo of how poorly they treated you. And it's louder than they anticipated. They did not just lose a person. They lost the mirror, which allowed them to believe they were someone better. And this is why they are spinning. Your absence represents a clash. It is not tranquil. It's not anything to ignore. It forces them to face what they did and who they did it to. You aren't coming back. And that awareness results in the loudest stillness they've ever experienced. Fourth, you were the soul that disguised their rot with elegance. Now the rot has been revealed. They never recognized how much you protected them, not merely from the repercussions, but also from exposure. You weren't just being nice. You were safeguarding their image, covering up their shortcomings, smoothing over their tantrums, and transforming their dysfunction into something acceptable to others. You did not lie for them, but your presence smoothed the rough aspects of who they really were. You made them seem more steady, more loving, and more human than they ever attempted to be. And they were comfortable in that delusion because your grace made them seem excellent in settings where they had no right being appreciated. You made justifications for conduct that was unacceptable. You granted the benefit of the doubt while the doubt was screaming at you to flee. You showed compassion even when you were at your lowest point. You shed light on someone who consistently drew you into the darkness. And they were so used to your covering that they mistakenly assumed it was who they were rather than what you were providing. Now that you've left, the difference is clear. People are beginning to realize what you have always kept silent: manipulation, hubris, mood swings, and gaslighting. It is no longer concealed beneath your allegiance. And without your efforts to keep it all together, they're breaking apart in front of the same people they previously strove to impress. The elegance you exuded made them seem balanced. Now that it's gone, their rot is exposed, and they're rushing to hide it. But they don't have what you had. They're not just losing you. They are losing access to the version of themselves that they enjoyed being while you were present. And that is the most difficult aspect for them, because the fact is that without your soul, they are alone in the world. They resemble precisely what they spent years rejecting. They do not want you back because they miss your heart. They want to borrow your light again so that others cannot perceive the truth. But now it is too late. The mask is off. The grace is gone. What's left is what they worked so hard to keep concealed. The rot you never talked about, but always concealed out of love. Number 5. They are not sobbing for love. They are grieving their control, disguised as love. They're not sobbing because they've lost someone they love. They are sobbing because they have lost power over you. They don't know how to operate without it. What they termed love was never about closeness, safety, or development. It was about manipulation disguised as devotion. It was all about keeping you emotionally dependent so that they could feel strong. Every praise came with strings. Every apology came with unspoken rules and conditions. Every time I missed you, it was genuine. I missed being able to utilize you without consequence. You were their emotional power source, someone they could deplete and then blame for being exhausted. You provided a secure environment in which they could act out and then pretend nothing happened. And since you were compassionate, loyal, and forgiving, they misunderstood your affection for approval. They saw your empathy as a vulnerability they might exploit. Now that you've disconnected from the system and regained your peace, they're spiraling not in pain, but in withdrawal. Their emotional supply has been cut off, and they are plummeting. They aren't pacing because they miss your soul. They're pacing because the leash they had around your heart broke, leaving nothing to yank on. They no longer have access to your commitment, quiet, or emotional effort. And it scares them, not because they are upset, but because they recognize they cannot regain that kind of power from anybody else. You were a special type of patient, forgiving, and strong. They misunderstood all of this for stupidity. They are now mourning, not you, but the version of you that allowed them to rule the relationship while claiming it was love. They aren't in love with the real you. They're smitten with the part you performed, the one who always provided, remained, and made excuses. However, that function has been retired. You are no longer accessible for emotional blackmail. You are no longer perplexed by their guilt games. And they can't believe that the love they tried to provide couldn't entice you back into the jail they called home. They are grieving the loss of power, which will never be restored. Number 6, your tranquility. Is there insanity? It was never supposed to be yours. Your calm is driving them insane because, in their opinion, you were never meant to discover it. They were counting on you being shattered, confused, and always questioning yourself. They wanted you to feel unworthy so that they could feel strong. The concept that you could recover, that you could be happy without them, that you could laugh, flourish, and shine despite everything they had put you through. It is not only shocking to them, but also frustrating. They did not elevate themselves by becoming better people. They elevated themselves by keeping you down. Your agony helped them feel in control. Your quiet gave them the impression of power, and your continual attempts to demonstrate your value made them feel like gods. So now you're at peace, not the phony peace in which you bite your tongue and grin through mayhem. However, they are unable to comprehend true tranquility. They can't look at it without breaking down inside. Because your peace symbolizes the one item they believe they took from you, your power to become entire. They remember the version of you that sobbed in quiet, sat up late wondering what you had done wrong, and continued giving simply to feel recognized. That version made them feel valuable. But the new you, unconcerned, focused, and full of clarity and brightness, makes them feel tiny, helpless, and vulnerable. Every smile you share, every boundary you create, and every moment of happiness you have without their shadow over you informs them that they failed. They did not shatter you. They did not abandon you. Shattered and angry, you rose. And your climb was neither loud nor spectacular. It was stable, elegant, and obvious. That's what makes them insane. Because they understand the truth. They know how hard they tried to destroy you. They are aware of the sorrow they caused and the perplexity they exhibited. They know you should have collapsed beneath the weight of it all. But you didn't. You got up, healed, and transformed into someone they no longer recognized or controlled. And that kind of tranquility, it's not just strong. It's an insult to every illusion they've ever created about who had power in your tale. Number 7. They weaponized history, and now they are choking on it. They saw your common past as a trap, not a resource. Every time you attempted to move away, they delved into the past and flung an old memory at you. A picture, a narrative, and a chuckle you once shared, not to reunite, but to rekindle your loyalty. They understood that if they could elicit enough emotion, they could distort your perception. They were not reminiscing to heal. They used nostalgia as a leash. They made you feel terrible for even considering leaving after all we had gone through. Do you remember when I was there for you? However, those reminders were selective. They never mentioned the treachery, the emotional games, or the nights you wept yourself to sleep because they had harmed you. Only the occasions that presented them in a positive light. It never was about love. It was all about control. Using emotional blackmail, they idealized chaos. They attempted to modify the tale such that each red flag resembled a rose. They wanted you to forget about the manipulation and only remember the milestones. But now you're awake. You stopped filtering the past through desire and began seeing it with clarity. And what once felt heartfelt now seems exploitative. What used to make you question your instincts now proves you were correct to leave. They don't know what to do now that their most powerful weapon, the past you previously treasured, has entirely lost its sway over you. They continue to dangle the past in front of you like bait, but you aren't biting. That is what is breaking them. The memories they used to entice you back are now useless to you, not because they didn't happen, but because you can now see the whole picture, not simply the edited version they hoped you'd remember. Without that strategy, they are exposed. There is nothing left to manipulate. No longer recall when. No more guilt trips cloaked in compassion. You are no longer emotionally open for revisionist history. They're choked on the very memories they exploited to weaponize, because they are the only individual who is still locked in the past. Number 8. They're seeing the person they once took for granted become untouchable. They're not simply unhappy because you departed. They are shocked by who you become as a result of your actions. When they gained access to you, they treated you as if you were disposable. They missed your worth, minimized your brightness, and pretended that your existence was a given. They assumed you'd be waiting, always ready, always stuck, striving to establish your value. But you didn't just depart. You achieved a higher level. You began to heal. You became serious about your development. And the version of you they see from a distance no longer resembles the one they used to influence. You grew in ways they never dreamed. You began walking with confidence. Your energy shifted. You began speaking clearly, living with focus, and establishing boundaries as if they were second nature. You are no longer seeking affirmation. You are the validation. And this is the hardest thing for them. The world has taken notice. People are attracted to your enthusiasm, power, and knowledge. You become magnetic without having to beg, bend, or break to get someone's attention. What they're experiencing today is not heartbreak. It is shame, because they understand what they have. They simply didn't believe anybody else would see it. They assumed you'd always be neglected, that your value would be concealed as long as they made you question yourself. But now you are gleaming, not because they finally recognized you, but because you did. They're seeing someone they once dismissed as forgettable become memorable. You are gleaming in a manner that cannot be faked. And the agony they are experiencing today isn't only from losing you. It is knowing that they will never have access to you again. They are understanding too late that you were the godsend, the genuine, rare one. And they bungled it, assuming you'd never find it out. They convinced themselves you were not all that. You'd never be recognized, and they could do better. But now they're sitting quietly, watching you become everything they secretly dreaded. Untouchable, incapable, and completely unforgettable. Number 9. Your limits are a language people refuse to learn but cannot avoid. You gave them every opportunity to do right by you. You were not harsh. You were not harsh. You were clear. You gently explained your limitations. You described what harmed you. And you explained what was no longer acceptable. Even nevertheless, they continued to challenge you since they did not respect your limits. They saw your kindness as a sign of weakness. Your forgiveness was a reset button. Your love was a certainty. They saw your refusal as an attempt to persuade me. They viewed your standards as ideas, not as a line in the sand. However, when you eventually made that choice, not out of wrath, but out of clarity, everything changed. You did not yell. You did not make a spectacular announcement. You merely moved differently. The door closed quietly, and now they're the ones left talking to the stillness, perplexed and irritated that the old games no longer work. They have no idea how to deal with someone who cannot be guilt, enticed, or tripped into submission. They don't understand your limits. They cannot comprehend how someone can say no without flinching. How can someone walk away and really mean it? Manipulators are absolutely taken aback by such emotional self-respect, since it indicates a change in power. They used to rely on your hesitancy, overthinking, and fear of confrontation. They weaponized your generosity as a tactic. But now you've taken it all back, and you're no longer quiet and tranquil. Grounded is more strong than any battle you could have had. They cannot argue with it. They cannot twist it. They can't turn it into something that benefits them. They are losing their minds. Not because you shouted, but because you didn't. Your quiet is motivated by commitment, not weakness. And they understand that you don't owe them another discussion, opportunity, or second of your energy. You've said everything you needed to say. Also, set limits for yourself. They're not up for debate. They are not a call for attention. They mark the conclusion of a chapter that should have finished a long time ago. Number 10. They wanted you back, but only if you arrived shattered. They do not want you back. They desire the broken version of you that was easier to manipulate. The person who apologized for something you did not do, who expressed your grief to those who were determined to misinterpret it, and who remained faithful while being slowly destroyed. That was the version they felt most strong with. You were not a menace when you questioned yourself. You were not threatening when you shrank to make them feel at ease. That version of yourself handed them the upper hand. And now that it's gone, they're unsure how to cope with who you've become. They aren't reaching out because they have changed. They've reached out because you did. And your progress upends the very dynamic that they previously thrived on. You used to bend to maintain the calm. Now you are the peace, and you will not allow anybody who interrupts it. That change in you, that inner power, clarity, and resolve to settle for less. It makes them feel weak since the tactics they use to keep you close are no longer effective. You no longer feel moved by guilt. You don't fall for emotional bait. You don't feel compelled to show your value to someone who has consistently ignored it. And it is what is fueling the madness. They cannot control the healed version of you because it sees through the loop. They cannot gaslight you because you have recovered your reality. They can't manipulate your emotions since you've finally trusted your instincts. You've created a new version of yourself that doesn't need to be loved, and they don't have access to it. They're now locked in a loop, attempting to summon the version of you that they broke. The person who would have answered the phone, showed up, and offered another opportunity. But that individual does not exist anymore. You buried them. And every time they seek for the past, they come up empty-handed because healing destroyed the version of you who used to justify their dysfunction. They wanted you back, but in parts. You're no longer useful in their game now that you're healed. And it's not heartbreak they're experiencing. It's fury at losing the only version of you they've ever known how to abuse. Your recovery did not just release you. It disclosed the whole game. You are healing did not only set you free. It destroyed the illusion while you were still in survival mode, attempting to gain their respect or comprehend their inconsistencies. You couldn't see exactly what was going on. You were too preoccupied putting out emotional flames to notice who kept lighting the match. However, once you began actually mending, rather just faking or repressing, something extraordinary occurred. You stopped blaming yourself. You began connecting the dots. You recognized the patterns, the triggers, and how they distorted tales to make you question your own reality. And with that, the whole game became apparent. You knew it was not about love. It was all about control. You watched how they used guilt to reduce you, quiet to punish you, and tenderness as a reward for following their script. You noticed how they shifted, blame, withhold support, and only appear when it suits them. Nothing was an accident. None of this was done unintentionally. It was calculated. You finally saw the blueprint. Now that you're no longer emotionally involved, Your presence poses a danger to all they've established via deception. You don't flinch anymore. You do not play along. You're not perplexed, agitated, or yearning for their acceptance. And that scares them, because someone who has been healed and can see properly cannot be deceived or disarmed. You're familiar with the methods. You speak the language yet refuse to engage. You're now a threat to their image, not because you're attempting to expose them, but because your freedom inevitably shows what they sought to conceal. People might see the change in you. Your article speaks louder than their story. Your elevation brings their version of events into doubt, which is what they are most concerned about. Not vengeance, not confrontation, but unequivocal evidence that they were not the victim. They were the architects of your anguish. Healing transformed you into the one thing they couldn't handle, the mirror. Now, just being true to yourself makes their life more difficult to sustain. You did not merely leave the game. You broke it. And now they're trying to reinvent a tale that no longer makes sense to you. No more playing the fool. A number. Their guilt is not leading to repentance. It's causing a mental collapse. Their guilt is not promoting progress. It's causing mayhem. Because, deep down, they are not experiencing an awakening. They are having a meltdown. And the distinction counts. True repentance involves responsibility, humility, and a genuine desire to improve. However, they are in a state of terror. It's an ego breakdown. It's the agony of discovering too late that the person they disregarded, exploited, and rejected was really the rarest thing they'd ever had. And now you're totally out of reach. They're not regretful about what they did. They're sorry they were revealed. They're sad they no longer have the access they took for granted. They apologize. The narrative has reversed, and everyone now knows the truth. Because they were so busy treating you as if you were disposable that they never pondered what it would be like to see you succeed. Not just without them, but despite them. They are now on a mental, emotional, and spiritual downward spiral. They assumed they'd always have control of the narrative. They assumed they'd always be the one who seemed stronger, more stable, more desirable. But seeing you heal, mature, and go ahead without resentment destroyed the illusion. You did not simply survive. You became untouchable. Nothing disturbs a person more than the knowledge that they can no longer access what they used to easily, especially because it has grown 10 times more valuable. They are unable to repair this, not because it is impossible, but because it never included a mistake. It was about a trend. They never wanted to change the cycle until they lost the one person who saw them, loved them, and then walked away when enough was enough. And now they are choking from their own shame. Not the sort that transforms you, but the kind that breaks you when you realize you've wrecked something holy and will never have another opportunity. This is not growth. It's desperation. It's the unraveling of someone who realizes that what they tossed away was more than simply valuable. It was irreplaceable. And now, without a mask to hide behind and no one to blame, they're drowning in the repercussions they promised would never happen. A number. You didn't just depart. You let the door to rust off its hinges. You did not depart to make a statement. You fled because remaining would have ruined you. And you didn't stroll for show. It was not a performance. It was the quietest and most powerful choice you'd ever made. You didn't storm out, thinking they'd see your value and rush after you with apologies and promises. You did not leave a back door open or indicate that you would be accessible if things changed. You did not even slam the door. You let it decay. You let the whole edifice to come apart because you understood that any entryway based on deception, misunderstanding, and emotional weariness was not worth returning to. There was no spectacular farewell or last warning, just distance, tranquility, and silence. And the quiet is now louder than any debate you've ever had because they anticipated a response. They anticipated tears, pandemonium, or at the very least a plea for understanding. Instead, they received a complete, clean, and everlasting absence. And it is tormenting them. They cannot comprehend it. They don't know what to say to someone who doesn't play the game. They are used to controlling the exit, switching the narrative, and reappearing whenever it is opportune. But with you, the script crumbled. You did not just quit their world. You have departed their system. And that type of departure is terrible for those who rely on access to your spirit to fuel their ego. Now they're frozen in place, looking at a door that no longer exists. The worst aspect is that they are well aware that they would be unable to track you wherever you go. Your progress revealed their limitations. Your tranquility made their pandemonium unpleasant. Your silence demonstrated that all you had said was not exaggerated. The reality was something they refused to confront. They thought they could use guilt to entice you back in. They believed they could use breadcrumbs to keep you trapped. But you did not just move ahead. You developed. And once you've experienced actual healing, you don't go back to surviving only to make others feel better. You let the past disintegrate. You let the door decay. You fled barefoot, bold, and free. That is not vengeance. That is what genuine liberty looks like. It scares the crap out of them. A number. You are not their resolution. That's what's making them furious. They believed you were simply taking up space, not altering the conclusion in their minds. They always had time. They imagined that once life settled down and the mayhem they sought had worn them out, they'd be able to return to you. And you would be there, perhaps a bit cautious and remote. But it's still open, still waiting, still holding the door. However, they never considered the fact that you were not hesitating. You were healing. You were not waiting. You were concluding chapters. They believed they had the right to finish. They always imagined they'd have the last say, or at least the opportunity to redeem themselves when they were ready. But you are now inaccessible. Not because you are hiding, but because you are finished. That's what's making them furious. You didn't need an apology to move on. You didn't require a lengthy explanation or an emotional goodbye. You gave yourself the tranquility they never had the confidence to provide you. You healed your own wounds, achieved closure, and went away with your head held high and your spirit intact. That is what their ego cannot manage. You didn't need them to find healing. You did not sit around hoping they would change. You did not put a note in the bottle for them to find later. You made your own ending, one without their voice, approval, or delayed sorrow. And now they're locked in a loop. They can't leave since closure was meant to happen on their terms. But you reversed the script. You made peace without the performance. You made peace without expecting them to admit what they did. And the version of you they expected to see again is no longer present. They urged you to seek answers. But you choose tranquility over answers. You choose forward over complete circle. And that sort of power, that kind of self-esteem, it's the one thing their ego can't get over, since it signifies the tale has ended and they are no longer the main character. You didn't just walk away. You awoke. And that enlightenment did not merely transform your life. It collapsed. Every illusion they created revolved on your quiet, kindness, and commitment. You were never feeble. You were compassionate. You were not confused. You were simply hoping they'd approach you with the same intensity. You didn't dispute when they mistaken your heart for a doormat. However, you did not beg me, Rose. And that surge surprised them with its volume. They are now unraveling. Not because you injured them, but because you won without seeking vengeance, by healing without their apologies, and by creating your own closure, peace, and strength. And it is this kind of metamorphosis that destroys their whole ego. They did not anticipate to lose access. They didn't expect to see the same person they dismissed become unapproachable, unconcerned, and indisputably elevated. You've become the mirror they can't look into, the reality they can't change. They are haunted, not by what you did to them, but by what they did to someone who really meant, "I love you." And now, no breadcrumb, deception, or performance can reach you, since your spirit has advanced from survival to sovereignty. The most poetic element was that you never had to prove anything. Your absence said everything. If this message has touched home and opened your eyes, don't keep it to yourself. Click the subscribe button now to join a community of chosen ones rising together. Smash the like button to demonstrate that you're done settling for less and are ready to assert your authority. Leave a comment below. Share your tale, your breakthrough, or what stood out the most. Also, remember to share this video with someone who needs to hear this message today. Your involvement extends beyond just providing help. It communicates to the universe that you are devoted to your own development and restoration. So let us become stronger, smarter, and freer together. The next stage of your trip begins here. God bless you.